It's my pleasure today to introduce our guest speaker, Audra McCarthy. Normally I'm the one juggling the speakers as the speaker's host, but I was having an online meeting with Audra a month or so back, and it clicked that she'd be a fantastic person to have address our club, so interesting to hear from you today. Audra is the CEO of the Defence Teaming Centre. The Defence Teaming Centre is an Adelaide-based but national organisation that supports Australians' defence industry in engaging with the Department of Defence. And given the focus these days on sovereign capability, that's a very important role, speaking as myself who works for an SME that's involved in the defence space. So without further ado, I'll get Audra to come up and tell us all about it. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, and thank you, Gary, for that lovely introduction, and also thank you, Rotary, for the invitation and to share the proceedings from today. It's been a lovely insight for me to actually have visibility of the inner workings of Rotary, and also personally to understand better what the role of Rotary is in our community. And I'm certainly have been inspired, particularly from you two new inductees today. My name is Audra and I'm the CEO of Defence Teaming Centre, and I've been holding this position now for a little over 12 months. I don't think there's many people out there who love what they do, and I'm certainly one of those who loves what they do. I think my job is not a job, it's actually a hobby, it's a passion, it's an obsession. I was very fortunate enough to step into this role and join the DTC. I joined the DTC 2 years ago. And at that time I was working for Lockheed and I was on the board of the DTC. Historically I've worked with defence industry for the past 10 years, and I used to be a business advisor for the Centre for Defence Industry Capability, which is where I developed my passion for Australia's defence industry and being able to help businesses, particularly small to medium-sized businesses, and from there I found myself in the DTC. I grew up in a small manufacturing business in Far North Queensland in Innisfail, and Dad started his business out in fibreglassing, making fiberglass water tanks, eskies, tank repairs. And then in the late 80s, early 90s, we transitioned our business into polyethylene rotational moulding. And when kids on school holidays were bumming around at the beach, I was working in the family business on the shop floor doing grotty factory-related tasks, as you do in a small family business. But this developed a passion for business and small business. And after doing a business degree, I find I have a duty now to give back to the community by helping small businesses enter into the defence sector. So the Defence Teaming Centre, we're a not-for-profit industry association, and my job is to help members to connect to opportunities in defence. And we do that by having a community of defence primes, academia and research organisations, as well as SMEs, who come together with the purposes of delivering defence capability and being able to contribute to our defence industry sector. My role is to make sure that my members put their best foot forward and to maximise their opportunities of winning work, and that's through developing those businesses. So we offer a lot of development opportunities, training, information and services to members, because we have a lot of businesses who are new to defence and don't understand the nuances of the sector. We have, as a country, the Australian government has making a record investment into its defence budget. It is going on a major shopping spree of buying some really significant high-value assets, ships, submarines, planes, land vehicles, electronic systems, and so forth. And that's taxpayers' money. And we need to keep that money here in Australia to create jobs for Australians. And we're talking about a major shift in our economy. Historically, Department of Defence has reverted to foreign military sales for the purchases of its kit, and that has meant money going offshore. So now we're looking at focusing on how do we manufacture, build and design this kit here in Australia to produce our own industrial capability for an enduring future. And that requires a huge uplift of industrial capability. We require businesses to transfer and transition into the defence sector. We need them to learn how to do business with defence, and we need defence to learn how to do business with Australia's SMEs. And that's where I come into the fold, working with my members to bridge that gap. Gary's brief today was very clear, as were his instructions about punctuality and how the day was going to go, and I'm pleased to say I've been following those instructions to a T, as all good defence people should do. I'll give you a bit of an outline of an overview of the defence industry climate. One of the nuances of the defence sector is it's very hard to get into our sector for businesses. If you're in business for yourself, you're a manufacturer or a service provider, you'll typically undertake business development activities pursuing work in any sector, and normally you can expect a return on your BD activities to materialise within a few months. In the defence market or sector, it can take 3 to 5 years for a purchase order to materialise from your BD activities. That's huge. It's a long period of time. If you're a machine shop, metal fabricator, that's a lot of networking events, a lot of conferences, a lot of conversations, a lot of meetings, a lot of investment of your time, travel costs that you have to invest before you get your first purchase order. And that first purchase order is most likely to be a prototyping purchase order, so there may not even be anything significant in it. And so why do people join the defence sector? Why do they enter? It's so hard. I often tell businesses that if you're wanting a purchase order to save your business today, this is not the market for you. But if you're wanting to enter the sector because you want to diversify your business, and I hate to use the word future-proof, but to a certain extent the defence market does enable you to future-proof your business because it is resilient to the recession, and we certainly saw that materialise this year with the event of COVID. COVID, suffice to say, caught everyone unawares, even defence industry. We were all, as a community, as a sector, as a country, weren't prepared for the immediate lockdown that we're all thrust into in February. And what that did was, it immediately put our defence industry sector to the test. For the very first time since our last world conflict of the World War II, and perhaps even Vietnam and the Korean Wars, where we actually starting to realise what does it mean to have industry recognised as a fundamental input to capability. It meant that if we were to be suddenly deployed to war, what is industry's involvement in that? How secure are our supply chains? How robust are our supply chains? What is industry's capability to continue to deliver kit and material and supplies to the Australian warfighter? COVID was a very good test of that. In February, I was called to an emergency meeting with the Premier to provide an update on what the status was, what we see or foresee to be problems or issues likely to arise as a result of the immediate lockdown. That then culminated in me attending weekly meetings with the Department of Defence and the Ministers for Defence and Defence Industry to provide feedback as to what our observations were from defence industry. As an advocate for defence industry, it was my role to canvass my 200 odd members, have conversations with them to understand what projects they're delivering into and what the implications of closure of airlines, freight lines, what will that have on project delivery, and then transfer or communicate that message back into defence, who could then calculate what the risk to project delivery and the Australian warfighter was going to be. Even I myself was not prepared to have such an influential role in our national pandemic. So it was also a good test of my mettle and my leadership within this sector. With the relaxation of social restrictions, we've seen our businesses almost return back to normal. One of the things about COVID was because defence refers to national security, anything in industry that related to defence was given, priority treatment. Our freight lines and any freight associated with defence supply chains was opened up. We lobbied government to fast track and bring forward expenditure on projects which would keep industry fully engaged. And that is one of the reasons why the defence sector is one of those resilient sectors during a time of recession, and perhaps it's one of those it's a healthy benefit, or a trade-off, as you could say, for those companies who have to wait the 3 to 5 years to get into the sector. One of those benefits is finally flowing back to industry. So during COVID, we didn't see any massive changes occur in the defence sector. The work continued, the jobs got done, the projects got delivered, and we're continuing to see that. As we emerge from economic recovery and government is continuing to invest in the economy to create jobs, the expenditure is flowing through in the form of infrastructure projects, and other projects are being brought forward, which is a great outcome for Australian industry. But the challenge is, how do we find that industrial capability to deliver on these projects? If the money's being spent and it's being made available, that's great, but we have this thing on the side called Australian Industrial Capability Program. And that's our carrot and our stick, as you could say, to entice our defence primes to actually support our local industry and have local industry involved in our programs. And so that's a huge challenge. We haven't built a submarine here in Australia in a very long time, and we've had bouts of nil activity in our shipbuilding program, which has resulted in the decimation of a lot of industrial capability, and so that all has to be rebuilt, and there's a cost associated with that. Those costs effectively make our industry less competitive. There's start-up costs involved. And so, interestingly, in our sector, we have a very challenging trade-off between how do we cost-effectively use the taxpayers' funds to deliver these defence projects, but also build the industrial capability that we need. In many instances, it's more expensive to go for the Australian supplier in the first instance. That's because of the start-up costs. But I say to you, as fellow taxpayers, not to judge what you see in the media when you hear stories about the cost blowouts and how expensive Australian industry is, but to consider that cost blowout or that expense as an investment in our future. It's a starting point. And sure, it might cost a little bit to get things going. We expect over time that the learning curve will take effect and we will grow a very competitive and efficient defence industry sector. I do think, and I'll start wrapping up, I do think we have a very positive future ahead, but it does take a lot of awareness and appreciation from the general public. One of the things I've learnt from working in this sector is that the public and the media are very critical, and they don't help what we're here to deliver. I once asked I interviewed 3 companies on a panel, why do you deliver into defence? A, it takes you 3 to 5 years to win work. Some companies get it early, some companies get a defence purchase order lobbed on their lap and they weren't even asking for it. There's a lot of hoops you've got to go through, a lot of standards, a lot of certifications. The contracting process is arduous, it's time consuming, it's costly. There's restrictions on who you can employ in your business in terms of nationalities. Why would you do it at all? One business came back and she said, my business overall has benefited as a result. I'm now punching well and truly above my weight. The quality of my product has improved to no end, and that would never have come if the requirements of the defence sector were not imposed upon her business. And she run this is Direct Edge Manufacturing. Diane Edgerton, she runs a business in Tasmania. It's a metal fabrication business. And she said they now can guarantee the quality and timeliness of products coming out of their factory. She refuses to enter into a price war because she understands the value of the product that she's delivering into the defence sector, and now her conversations with customers is not about price. It's about the value that her business presents and delivers into that supply chain for the Australian warfighter. The second reason why people do it is because it's a challenge. And I think there's many of you in the room today who will understand that we all like a challenge. As a redhead, you tell me something can't be done, and my response is always challenge accepted. I'm going to prove to you that it can be done. And that's what we see in Australian industry, and that's why I love working with Australian businesses and SMEs, because I love that drive, commitment, determination, and I want to give these businesses as much help as I possibly can. Thank you for your attention. If anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you for that. Just a question, more so, you're talking about the manufacture part, how about designs and patents? Because I remember years ago, Today Show, they had a guy that invented the rail gun, and the next time he got him to do it, they classified it. He wasn't allowed to do it, and he tried to sell it to the defence at the time. But as soon as someone saw it on the TV, the Americans snapped it up, and guess what? We're buying the technology back off of them, and it should have been ours. And you just think, all we had to do was outlay a little bit of cash to start up with, and now it's costing us a fortune.
Yeah, and that is a popular story. The Australian Department of Defence is a very risk-averse buyer, and it's not uncommon for Australian innovation to emerge, and it could be very leading-edge innovation, which is actually purchased by overseas departments and sold. And so the designer gets paid, that's great, but that overall superiority that we lose as a result is gone. One of the things Department of Defence is bad at, our Australian Department of Defence is bad at, and that is supporting our own. Australians, we have a tall poppy syndrome. If it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. It can't be true. And Australians have this massive can-do attitude, and we displayed that during World War II of the Anzac spirit. She'll be right, mate. We'll bear down, and we'll get this done, and we'll take that cliff. And we demonstrate that in business, in our innovation. Yet, for some strange reason, there's this perceived risk that Australian small businesses bring to the supply chain. They can't possibly do it. They're too small. It's got to go to a big company. And that's something that in the advocacy arguments and conversations I'm having now is starting to educate the Department of Defence and its purchase officers that just because you're small doesn't mean risk. And if it is risk, then let's talk about that. Let's define that risk. Let's give our Australian businesses a go, so to speak. But it is a common problem.
Thank you. Development, and one which had with these huge defence contracts. When the Collins-class submarines began to be built, Kockums, the Swedes, had a commitment to get a big percentage of the submarines built in Australia, but also they had plans to establish a number of businesses in Australia owned by Sweden and some other companies. But that was technology transfer. And in the long term, technology transfer is just as important as employing Australians, because it's longer lasting. Is there any commitment by the French for the vessel, and for the Americans for the software and the armaments, to establish businesses in Australia? And you're national, aren't you? Yeah. So and South Australia, you look around and you find out of anybody that's able to do heavy engineering in South Australia, and it's a bit of a problem. Is there any commitment to develop industries by the Americans or the French in that direction?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of Naval Group and Lockheed Martin, those two companies which you're referring to, but I can say is that the lessons learned from the Collins program have been weaved back into the C1000 program, and that comes through the contracting mechanisms. So with the Collins program, when we acquired that and built that, we didn't own the IP. and that created problems. And so in the current contracting system for the Future Submarine Program, the Commonwealth has insisted that it retains and owns all the IP in the program. So that contract mechanism is there. Then we have the Australian Industry Capability Program, and you will have seen through the press that the primes are expected to write and produce Australian Industry Capability Program, which is supposed to articulate their commitment to Australian industry. That's actually being taken very seriously by the Minister now. And we are seeing the programs emerge that actually support that. And there is investment being fed into industry to grow that capability. There's also partnerships which are beginning to emerge that support the transfer of technology to Australia. So we're dealing with Naval Group who have, a strong embedded supply chain over in France. And obviously, they know and have all the know-how over there. We want to bring it to Australia. We have this policy which says thou shalt do here in Australia. And so there's a number of partnerships which are beginning to emerge where some of the French companies are beginning to transfer to Australia and set up shop. We're starting to see contracting mechanisms emerge and policy emerge where the government is insisting that for the work to be done in Australia, it wants the work to be done in Australia by Australians. It wants the business to be owned by Australians. And most importantly, it's even going as far to stipulate that it wants its board to reside here in Australia. So we're seeing behaviours change, but at the end of the day, we're dealing with the Department of Defence and policy, and these things are always very slow.
Well, thank you for that insight. That's been fantastic. I got the impression, maybe so, that your focus is primarily on hardware and industries that actually engage in the provision of hardware. But we know that defence is all about people. What are the opportunities for engaging and providing what we might call personal services or software services to support the people who operate the equipment?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so look, it wasn't my intention to give the impression that we're just focusing on hardware. It's just what I naturally refer to because I'm an accountant by trade. I'm not a technical person, and it's easier for me to refer to hardware than all the software skills because I'm not a geek. But no offence to the technical people in the room, Gary. Look, the programs, the nature of the programs, it's actually probably more dominated towards the soft skills and the technical soft skills at that, and professional services, because the nature all our programs are in the design phase, so we do need those design services, we need those certification services, and software engineering, and those programs are, and skill sets are being demanded at significant lengths in the program. So whilst Naval Group and Lockheed are still in the design phase, if we're talking about the C1000 program in particular, they're in the design phases of their programs, they're already snaveling up these skilled people in Australia. And we know even the SME community are also trying to fast track the development of engineers, design engineers, and so forth, because we know, and it's been widely acknowledged now, that we have a skills gap in that particular area, hence why there's a lot of investment going into STEM at universities, investment being put into apprenticeships to try and address that gap. Does that answer your question? Okay, good, thanks.
Thank you very much, Audra. As someone who works for an SME in defence, Audra sings very much from our songbook, and if you think working for defence is hard, try working for the primes. It's a completely different story. I'd like to present you with a certificate of appreciation, and a donation has been made on your behalf to mitigate and contain the COVID-19 pandemic, and also to support the efforts to eradicate polio worldwide. So thank you yet again.
Thank you very much.
Would you like to?